I would say from a business standpoint, it's a decent global economy, not great. There's a ton of volatility. But any business person that says, I'm going to wait to invest because I think the November elections in the United States are going to be so telling, or you're waiting for some sign, some geopolitical sign, you're going to be sitting on your wallet for a long time. And so I just think this uncertainty is the state of affairs, and it's going to be that way for a long period of time. So I like, given where we've been, I like where the world is today and feel generally pretty optimistic about, not without issues and not growing as fast as we'd like, but plenty out there for business people to invest in. Three big themes that I think are quite interesting. One is just what's going on from an energy transition standpoint. If you're a steel mill in Texas, you're paying 4 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. Your competitor in Germany is paying 20 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity. This is the least expensive energy country in the world. That is a massive competitive advantage if you run a factory or anything you do. That gives the US a lot of capability that it didn't have. I think the aspects around manufacturing are stronger. The relative competitiveness of the US as a manufacturing base is better today than at any time in my 30-plus year career with GE. And the last thing I'd say is just the aspect of what's happening with social media, kind of what I call the industrial internet. That's all going into industrial assets. There's going to be tens of thousands of jobs created around analytics in the industrial setting. These are going to drive big productivity in the future. And so I see lots of innovation, not just by small companies, but by big companies in the future. And then the last thing I'd say, Bob, is I spent 2 years with 20-plus other business leaders and labor leaders working with the president on jobs and competitiveness. And I think, what I learned from that process is that there's really four things that create jobs and competitiveness. And I travel the world. We do business in 175 countries. Personally, I've been in 110 countries in my career around the world. And I think it's true across the board. It's training and education. You need more engineers and more welders if you want to be successful. It's really those two groups. Protect small business. We just crush small business in this country, and that is where the jobs come from. And for every job GE has, there's 8 in the supply chain that are small and medium business. Infrastructure, so all the stuff that, let's say you could do around the Olympics that improves infrastructure in Boston, that's going to pay dividends for decades. And then what I would call just regulatory reform. In other words, business people never like regulations. It's just part of our DNA, right? But there's no reason why it should take 10 years to get an electricity line approved across state lines when the actual human inspection time is 3 months, right? And so there's just no accountability in terms of speed or outcomes and regulations in the world today. And there's a reason why Texas has created more jobs than, I'll take Massachusetts out of it, but then other states, unnamed states in New England, right? It's just easier to do business. And I think that's true for every state, every city, every country I've ever been in. Those 4 things, Bob, matter.
I, too, believe that the U.S. is on an upward trajectory. I would very much look forward to the normalization of the interest rates and the growth in the economy and so forth. I know there are a lot of issues with labor force, unemployment, and issues to do with how much slack we actually have in the economy. But I think the movement that the Fed is making slowly, but going toward normalizing short-term interest rates and getting the Fed a bit out of some of the markets that it's in, given the size of the assets on its balance sheet, is definitely a step in the right direction, and I'm totally in favor of that. I hope we're not too deterred by, as you mentioned, the volatility of month-to-month data. I mean, I think it's the nature of the economy that we're in, that some months are going to look strong and other months aren't. But if you look at the totality of the numbers for this year, I think there's definitely an upward trajectory built into it. So I'd like to see us move further along the line of normalizing things. I thought Jeff's summary of all of the issues facing competitiveness in this country and worldwide are right on target. I'd like to really just focus a little bit in on the training and education issues. I think it's very clear that in Massachusetts in particular, that we are creating jobs but having a hard time filling them because we don't have the educated workforce that we need. And you know, it's engineers and it's welding for sure, but here it's also big data, biofarm, you know, biotech, all of the industries that, you know, are growing up and creating jobs here. We need to be educating the workforce to be in those jobs. And I think an important part of that sometimes gets overlooked as something that's sort of nice to do versus need to do is the issue of women in the workforce and valuing women, looking at education, particularly in the STEM fields, bringing women along who are increasingly bigger and bigger shares of graduate schools in almost every discipline, making sure that pipelines are filled in companies, not because it's nice to do, but because we need to take advantage of every ounce of brain power that we have, and not in subtle ways or in overt ways create blockages for that brain power to really evidence itself and really work into senior management in our organizations.
We need to be thinking about how do we grow our economy. And the only way we grow our economy, the only way we grow our GDP is increase population. And the only way to increase population is allow the opportunity of people to come to school here and stay here. Therefore, we have to unlock the value of real estate outside of 128. We have had zero job growth outside of 128 in the past 25 years. And if we can unlock that value by improving infrastructure and transportation and allow young kids to be able to buy houses for $150,000 in Worcester, in Agawam, and places like that, all of a sudden you're going to see those pockets of opportunities where there's very, very good labor forces, creating that precision manufacturing environment, creating clean tech factories and manufacturing out in those areas, and transporting those people back and forth. What's good for Western Mass is good for Boston, and somehow people believe that that's not the case. So to me, Bob, I think we really got to start right now with things going well on a long-term strategy for diversification, and I think that conversation begins very candidly with a knowledge that we have to invest in our infrastructure. And if we don't, we're going to put ourselves in a very, very difficult situation.
Right now, it appears that a jet engine has less than 5% labor, and a refrigerator has less than 2 hours of labor. And we're looking at where are the jobs coming from. And there is a story going around in the business community that says that 5 years from now, a jet engine plant will have but 2 custodians, a dog and a man. The man is there to feed the dog, and the dog is there to keep the men away from the equipment.
I knew you were going to do something like that, Bob.
Yeah.
So
I could see it in your face.
Where are these jobs coming from?
I could see it in your face. Well, so just to, you know, so I've worked for GE for 32 years. I would say early in my career, the vast move was for companies like GE to de-verticalize, outsource things. We moved south first, and then the notion was, like I was in GE Plastics, we moved from Indiana to Alabama to get to a right-to-work state. And then it was Mexico, China, and it was really all about the labor arbitrage. If you go back to the 1980s, really business and their workforce got along so poorly that you just wanted to, I remember working in Louisville, Kentucky in the mid-'80s, watching one day after another day of wildcat strikes and things like that. And you just couldn't wait to get out of the damn place, right? Someplace else. That's 25-year-old thinking. Today, I would say at GE, we make more of our own things because we really invent the product and the process at the same time. In fact, if you're talking about a jet engine, as much of our, you know, there's probably only 2 or 3 people in the world that can make a jet engine. And really the reason why is not just the science that goes into it, but making it is hard. And we like to be in businesses where making it is hard. So we actually value manufacturing a lot more. The cost of materials and how you work with materials actually is much more a part of the cost structure than labor. Our relationships with our own workers is much better. Really, you know, I worked in a place called Appliance Park. At one point, there were 25,000 people that worked there. Today, when we build a factory, there's 500 people, maybe one manager. So self-directed.
And one dog.
So well, there's a lot more people and no dogs, I would say, actually. And so I think the U.S. is much more competitive today. I think in our world, we like it because we can make things wherever we want. We'll open up probably 5 new manufacturing facilities in the U.S. every year. We probably have close to 80, we have 135,000 employees in the U.S., probably 80,000 manufacturing people. We export, we make things. Now, will manufacturing go, you know, went from 25% in 1970 to 9% of the workers today. Is it going to go be 20% again? I don't think so, right? There's just too much productivity and too much innovation that's going on. But manufacturing jobs are quite important because that's where a middle class, you know, if somebody working for us is going to be making 25, 30 bucks an hour, you're going to be able to live a nice life to do that. And, but the technology and everything about it has changed. So I think manufacturing should be part of the solution. It should be very desirable to create manufacturing jobs in Massachusetts because for every job that gets created here, there's a massive supply chain that goes into it. And you give up manufacturing at your own peril because that's, when I go to China, the Chinese government isn't saying, hey, Jeff, why don't you bring all your financial service businesses to China? They said, you can leave those in the US, thank you. We'd like to see you make things in China, right? Mm-hmm. So that's, you know, Bob, I think automation, but manufacturing, I think, on a relative basis, the U.S. is more competitive today than it's been in 30 years. That'll mean there'll be more value here today, but maybe just a few more jobs, not a lot more jobs.
What are we doing to both stimulate the kind of jobs that really need to be out there in the manufacturing sector and train the people for them? And what kind of a job are we doing on that? And Kathy, let me put that out to you because you're in the academic field right now, and that's a harder question.
Well, you know, it's a very difficult issue, and I don't think anybody has all the answers to it. Education and medicine suffer from the same problem. Technology can take you so far. Electronic medical records in the world of major academic medical centers, but in the end, it's the relationship that the physicians and the caregivers have to the patient. And in fact, most of the work that's being done in academic medical centers, I chair the board of Mass General Hospital, now is working at trying to keep people out of hospitals and keeping them close to where they live and work and keeping them well longer. So the question is, you know, what do we do with the academic medical centers and how do we fill them with tertiary and quaternary care, not just from this region, but from all over the country and all over the world. The issue of technology, which has been so powerful in manufacturing, reducing the number of people hands-on on the floor, probably increasing the number of people with higher education in the background that are designing, you know, systems. I guess I ask myself, you know, do we really want to create jobs for people who have the most basic and in many cases around this country at the high school level, very inadequate education? Or do we want to create the kind of jobs that need really good training and education and then do something about the infrastructure in this country? Massachusetts put a lot of money into ed reform going back into the 90s, and we've reaped some benefits from that. You know, our 8th graders do very well, both on national and international tests. But that doesn't mean we have the workforce that we need. We don't have the workforce that we need. We don't have the answers in medicine and education that, you know, are stuck in old ways of doing things. And we don't have the kind of unified network in this state that will educate people to do the jobs that we're increasingly creating. So we really need to think about infrastructure in that context. Bridges and highways and stuff like that are important, but education infrastructure is even more important. We have a ton of colleges and universities here. A lot of them are looking over the abyss and saying, you know, how are we going to keep our costs in line, with what we can legitimately ask for in terms of tuition. How can we keep the debt for our students down? And how can we get them the jobs that they need to be successful in the future? Those are big questions. I wish I had answers for them all.
John, what's your workforce look like, and how do you find getting employees for a company that should have a pretty broad spectrum of education and training?
Bob, our industry, I think, in the last 10 years has transformed itself from a blue-collar industry to a white-collar industry because technology is really invading the space of construction and engineering in a very significant way. Because as Jeff and Kathy point out, later productivity, we're doing more with less. But I think to the point here is we're really talking about a skills gap. And again, I'm going to comment about Massachusetts. There was a good article in the paper, I think on Monday or Tuesday, about the whole idea of vocational schools. How right now there is not enough seats at these vocational schools in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, especially for the people that really need the jobs, the lower class people. They're being taken by the middle and upper class people because they're learning certain proficiencies they otherwise didn't have. But these schools aren't engineered from a curriculum point of view to service the needs of our workforce today, our needed workforce. We've got 110,000 jobs that have gone unfulfilled right now, currently today, and people don't take that as a serious analytic. But it's a very, very important analytic. We talk about it at the Chamber all the time and at Mass Competitive Partnership with Bob. And my sense is what we put up with at MACP, which is that business group made up of Brian Moynihan and Bob Reynolds and Bob Kraft and various other people, Jay Hooley at State Street Bank. We came together with Bill Swanson, who led the effort at Raytheon, this Learn and Earn program, which is a pretty interesting model at Bunker Hill Community College. And what we did, we took all these large organizations we just talked about, Bank of America with Bob Gallery here, and we sort of put together a curriculum with the Bunker Hill Community College, brought these kids into our companies, and taught them specific skills that would be beneficial for them to either work at our companies or other adjoining companies in the workforce. And currently today we have about 270 kids over the last 2.5 years that we've put in places that we've received jobs, very, very good, medium-paying jobs. And I'm talking about $50,000 to $60,000 to $70,000 a year. The gap, Bob, is what I see is that business, unfortunately, is not at the table with government to talk about the needs of not the workforce today, but the workforce of the future. And if business doesn't come to the table on that conversation, we're going to continue to have this big gulf. I'll give you one example. It's like transportation. You think about the innovation district in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts we did over here in South Boston, okay? Right now, the development of that particular space is where it was supposed to be in 2024. The development over there is 10 years ahead of its time. You can see it. The traffic congestion is unwieldy. Who takes care of traffic? Government. Government wasn't at the table, business wasn't at the table with government to talk about a planned transportation strategy to service development needs. So right now we've got a confusion going on right now. So to me, it's a universal word about collaboration. We need to figure a way how we stop the partisan stuff that's going on in the country and in the world in Massachusetts and figure out how we can collaborate better, because at the end of the day, we're not competing against each other anymore. We're competing against the world. And that's a whole different conversation that we've never had before. And I think we need to start socializing that if we really want to be a powerful Commonwealth of Massachusetts going forward.
I would add, maybe just to John's, underemployment is the world's issue, right? So this is not just a uniquely American phenomenon. I'm going to be next week in Northern Africa, Middle East. You go to a country like Egypt or any of these countries, there's 60% unemployment among college grads, right? Mm-hmm. So this is the global issue. I personally think job development is the corporate social responsibility of this era. That's where we're taking our foundation and building things called GE garages in towns like Boston, where we put in an additive manufacturing machine, things like that, and allow small business people in Boston or people in the community to learn how to make things. This to me is kind of the big, because it just adds to the unrest of the country. You know, when people are unemployed, they're angry at government. When government's angry, they take it out on business. You know, you get in this, you get in this vicious circle, and I see it every place I go. I think the odds of immigration reform or tax reform or any of those things in the next 2 years is zero. Right. So you just sit there and say that the odds of doing anything purposeful are really off the grid. And the last thing I'd say is it's not necessarily Republican or Democrat. Right now, probably the issue I care the most about is the reauthorization of the Ex-Im Bank, right? If you ever told me at any time in my career that basically it would be Republicans who were blocking, the Ex-Im Bank, which helps lead exports and, things like that, I would have said, you're crazy. But you just have this polarization of far right and far left, and it's hard to get things done. So I think we kind of think about, we do all our planning assuming nothing's going to change, and just power through it, right? But I think the voice of small and medium-sized business is the only one we should care about. Everybody says they love them, Republicans and Democrats alike, and we do our best to kill them every day, right? It's almost like that's our written strategy. So that's, there's an expression in Brazil, it's they aimed at the wolves and killed the sheep. That's what we do. That's what we do. That's what we do in the United States, I think, sometimes.
And in a way, when you look at the CBO's forecasts for the deficit, the fiscal deficit going forward, it's gotten remarkably better, in part because the cost of health care is not escalating at the same rate that it was escalating, in part because interest rates have been so low, and the federal debt, the burden of interest expenses on the federal debt is a lot smaller than it was. So you're looking at a 3% budget deficit, which is typically what people think of in terms of a sustainable fiscal deficit for a country the size and shape of the United States with the kinds of things that we're involved in. We should be out there financing a little bit more and not trying to balance the budget. But that's not a good thing in terms of making the changes that we need for the future. I mean, the CBO looks out 5 years. It doesn't look out 10 and 15 years. And over a 10 to 15-year period, we do need that corporate tax reform. We do need that immigration reform. So the question is how to not only educate our workforce, but educate our politics as to what's really necessary.
The explosion of information technology and its merger with globalization presents challenges for everybody, not just manufacturing. I mean, I don't know, and I'd like your view of it, whether or not you think a manufacturing company can survive without being it. I wonder whether a law firm can survive without being into big data and analytics and utilizing them. And I think you may have been the one who created this word, the industrial internet. But it has application wherever. Where are we going with all of this?
I think every industrial company is going to turn out to be a software and analytics company as time goes on. In fact, I think it's already starting. Think about a jet engine that you fly. The next time you fly, 70% of which are GE, by the way, so you're in good hands. 20 sensors. A flight between Boston and Chicago is going to be probably a terabyte of data, something like that. And it's going to take wear on the blades, temperature, fuel consumption by the minute. You're going to be taking an incredible amount of data. And if we can get 1% improvement in fuel performance across the GE fleet installed base, that's worth $3 billion of profit to the airlines around the world. And that's essentially what they made last year as a group. So the impact of small changes driven by analytics is going to be massive. And you go to bed one night as an industrial company, you better wake up the next morning as an analytical company or else you're dead. So the good news is you can hire the talent, which we've done. We've got 1,200 people in California, right next to Silicon Valley, that are doing modeling of asset data from locomotives or aircraft engines or gas turbines or MR scanners. And ultimately, that drives great performance. If you can go to somebody running an oil and gas company and say, we can run your pipeline with no unplanned downtime, that translates to hundreds of millions of dollars of savings to them. And if you combine the physics, which really GE's built on material science and physics, with the analytics, that's the holy grail, right? So everybody uses fancy words because it's a way to gel communities and things like that. But when you hear industrial internet, think about no unplanned downtime, right? That notion, that saves tens of billions of dollars in the economy. And, Bob, it's already starting. It's a massive task, but, we look at it in terms of there's $1 trillion of GE technology in the installed base. So we think we have a head start.
Yeah, I guess.
That's our
It sounds
game.
like a rather high level of entry.
Yeah. So that's the game on. And I think it impacts everybody's everybody's business. Right?
John, you've used analytics and the technology for the smart model city. Would you tell us a little about that for the Olympics?
Yeah, one of the issues about the smart model city that Bob's talking about is as it relates to the Olympics, we've tried to introduce and leverage technology to a degree that we haven't and other countries around the world haven't to date. And we hosted a seminar here for a day. We flew in data scientists and modeling experts from all over the world and met at the Design Center probably about 5 months ago. And we leveraged the people at Stanford University, UCal Berkeley, MIT, Media Labs, Harvard Graduate School of Design. And there was about probably 34 of them. We put them in a room and talked about how do we create the smartest modeling out there for a geographical area, Boston and the surrounding communities. And we spent about $1.5 million, $2 million to date on this, and it's all privately funded. And what the idea of the model is sort of depict the different proposed venues, where they'd be located, and the impacts on those particular communities, both from a pedestrian point of view, a vehicular point of view, and a safety point of view. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, where we're proposing to put potentially an Olympic Village, how does that Olympic Village impact that community and the quality of life has been and will continue to be? At 10 o'clock, we can tell how many people are going to be in the area, theoretically, and how much vehicular traffic is going to be. Same thing with 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the same thing at 9 o'clock at night. So when we plug in one of those venues, we can tell exactly the impact of how many people could be coming in and going in that area. It deals with security, safety, transportation, food and beverage, and a variety of other types of things. And this model that we'll put together is something that we're hoping will be a value proposition for us to hopefully provide a sense of predictability to the USOC and then the IOC. But also, it's a way, if we don't win the Olympics, it's a legacy product that we can provide to the BRA, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to provide them with information that they had bits and pieces of it, but they were never able to aggregate it all together in a fashion that we're using today. So it's been quite interesting, and it's something that, as a Commonwealth of Massachusetts, one of our value propositions is going to be is that we're going to be the Innovation Olympics. Okay, we have the healthcare, knowledge-based economy, and so forth, but we need to drive hard this concept globally that Boston, not Silicon Valley, is the intellectual capital of the world, not from a snobbish point of view, but from a sense of we are leading the world in innovation. So it's pretty fascinating.
Is there something that is fundamentally wrong with the economy if you see income inequality? And are we losing talent? There's so many consequences to this.
I think we have a growth problem in the country. If our destiny is to grow the GDP 2%, none of these problems are going to get solved. It almost doesn't matter what program you endorse. If we can get the growth rate back up to 3 to 4% like it was for the 25 years before the financial crisis, it makes it easier to solve all these problems, right, Bob? So I think, it's a multifaceted economy. We got a lot of challenges. Wealth discrepancy is one of them. I think we've got a growth problem. For a lot of the executives I hang out with, like the people in this room, my dad worked for GE for 40 years. He worked in the aircraft engines business. He worked was a plant supervisor. Nobody has to explain to me the value of a GE job. A union leader, politician, I don't need them to explain that to me. I get it, And I think most of my colleagues are the same way I am.
And I'm very interested in your perspectives on China.
That's a great question. I've been going there a long time, 25 years. So I was in our plastics business when we started there. I ran our healthcare business when we started there. So I know it. I go there a lot, but every time I leave, my head explodes about what's, trying to project where they're going to go and things like that. It's a country where the best people are in government. So in essence, you're trained. If you're a really good executive, you go into the government. So you really do have a government class that is quite well educated, has a worldview, very well trained. The reforms are needed. I mean, the perversion in the Chinese economy is profound, and they know that. So the government kind of knows what they have. You know, Xi is suspicious of his own party, really, because there is a lot of bribery and corruption, and cleaning it up is something he needs to do. So I think that's good. He has consolidated power. And you know, from a GE standpoint, we localize, we are careful. There's not one decision in China that I don't make personally. We've made a few mistakes, but you know, we're part of the local economy. We don't bet the ranch on China. You know, we always think about the downside case. We always think about what could happen. You know, so there's a lot of risk. I'd say it's gone from being a macro story where everything grew to a micro story where if you're in the right industries, you're going to grow, but if you're in the wrong industries, there's going to be reforms. And never forget that you know, you talk about single-minded purpose, you know, from the time they wake up in the morning to the time they go to bed, the focus of the government is on housing and feeding 1.3 billion people.
Yeah.
And if you're a part of that solution, you're on the team. And if you get in the way of that solution, you're not on the team. Now, the anti-monopoly stuff, look, if Mercedes-Benz, if they earn 60% margins in China and 20% margins in Europe, the Chinese government knows that, right? And if you've allowed that to slip through your own risk screens as a company, you're a sitting duck in terms of what's, you know, how that all gets done. So you've got to be mindful of the things you do there and how they look and how they appear, because you know, when I go to in Beijing and I'll meet, you know, the people that do infrastructure are called the NDRC. They know everything about GE, right? Everything. Yeah. If I go see the Secretary of Energy or Commerce in the United States, they know us a little bit, but the Chinese guys know us a lot more than they do, you know? So they just connect the dots. They connect the dots for a living. So risky, going to be growth, risk, but ask yourself in the board meeting, how do we fit in their 5-year plan? How do we fit on their central goals? And if you align, you're going to be fine. But we don't, we have risk triggers, we study things. We are humble when it comes to China. And we're big, but we're humble.